So yeah, so I guess I'll start with a few very kind of brief comments and then some, interested to hear your own thoughts and some questions. Before really volunteering to take on this particular topic for the roundtable, I hadn't actually thought about this specific question in much depth. But when I was sitting down to reflect on it, the first thing that really jumped out to me was just thinking about if we're asking the question of, how does philosophy for children help us embrace failure? That we need to really know, well, what is failure? Well, what do we mean by failure? And there are two ways to think about failure that I think are especially challenged by engaging in philosophy and having children engage in philosophy. And there are two ways to think about failure that I also think really strongly resonate with children and the way we set up a lot of things in childhood. Um, But it looks like at least some of you potentially are in a K through 12 classroom. So you have to tell me if this still resonates. Um, so those two ways are, the first thing is failure to be right. So, stated positively, like being wrong. And we frame a lot of things, I think, that way for children. And the second is failure to achieve a goal. Feels like a lot of things in childhood are very goal oriented. And again, a lot of like sort of tasks and projects are framed in like, if you don't finish, you don't achieve this goal, you fail. So I want to talk about a little bit more about each of those and how I think doing philosophy with children can, challenge them. So first, starting with this idea of failure to be right. There's so much for children that's framed in terms of being right and wrong, not only just, I think, for children themselves frame a lot of things that way, but we also frame, things that way. I mean, school is structured around getting the right answers. Um, and also we kind of frame like morality and, what it means to be a good person and a lot of these like right and wrong kind of ways for kids. I mean, not always, but I think there's still a lot of undertones of like what's the right thing to do in a particular situation as it relates to how to treat other people. So right and wrong, I think, take on a very black and white dichotomous relationship in childhood. And, in a nutshell, I think philosophy with kids can really muddle that black and white dichotomy. Um, when you're engaging in like philosophical inquiry, particularly in the sort of community of inquiry model, where what that means is that a group of students are working together to try to answer some philosophical question. I think what it points out is that not only are we right uh, far less than we actually think that we might be, but it's also clear that right and wrong are not so easily like equated to good and bad. It's not an equal relationship. Um, and what it points out is when you're trying to answer some philosophical questions, right isn't even always a possibility. And being wrong is really less of a failure as sort of trying something out to make progress towards some sort of discovery or learning. So, you're when you're testing the waters for philosophical questions, you'll throw out a lot of like hypotheses or ideas, and then the whole point is to really pick apart those ideas and challenge them and go round and round and really try to be wrong. It's almost like there's value to being wrong because then, I mean, we say this, I think, in education all the time, like when you're wrong you learn something, but I think that point is really driven home when engaging in philosophy with children, because you can really see how like, okay, here's an idea. Well, the whole goal now is to challenge that idea to see if it's wrong, and if it's wrong, well, that's just a part of it. And then we kind of keep making progress. So that's the first thing. The second part was this sort of failure as framed as failure to achieve a goal. And as I kind of mentioned briefly already, I think a lot of things in childhood are very goal oriented, all about finishing. So finish your homework, you want to finish the test or learn the class material successfully, finish the game or win the game or finish your art project. So it's like you have this goal, you set out, you need to finish it. And if you don't finish it, well, something went wrong. That's a failure. And philosophy, I think, in ways that a lot of schoolwork doesn't, especially for younger children, really introduces this kind of idea of open-ended inquiry. So where we may have a goal, but it's not so clear when we've achieved that goal. Um, there's, when again, if you're doing the sort of community of inquiry method, it all centers around this question. So you'll like read something or watch a video, and then you'll have the students, or you might generate a philosophical question. So there's still the goal of, you're trying to answer that question. It's anchored by that. But students learn very quickly that it's a lot harder to answer these questions than it might at first seem. And it's not always possible. And, it's certainly not always possible in just like one session of kind of engaging with philosophy. And so I think it challenges this idea that to complete something or finish something is a failure. I think because you realize that a lot of things are not so easily finished or completed. And it's okay for things to be open-ended. I mean, if philosophy does anything, it introduces the idea that there's a lot of questions that are really hard to answer. And you have to get pretty used to sitting with uncertainty. And that sitting with uncertainty, I think, is something that's very unique for children that is offered by doing philosophy. So, yeah, so generally, I mean, just to kind of like in a nutshell, when we're thinking about this question, I think what doing philosophy with children does is it really changes the way that we think about what a failure is. It at least challenges the way that we think about what a failure is, and it makes sometimes what we might in other realms think of as a failure or appear to be a failure to not be so clearly failures, at least not in certain cases. So yeah, so that was kind of my like thoughts when I sat down again to reflect on this, and I'm happy to hear what you all think. So thanks.